Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going back in time to October 1966 to unpack a brutal crime that has literally puzzled investigators for over half a century. It's a captivating, deeply chilling, and entirely unresolved mystery, and we're going to look purely at the facts and evidence as they unfolded. So, before we even touch on the infamous Zodiac cases that terrorized Northern California starting in 1969, we really have to ask ourselves a massive lingering question. Did that terrifying story actually begin 3 years earlier, hundreds of miles away, in Riverside, California? To understand why so many people think it absolutely did, we need to look at the tragic timeline of a young woman whose case still haunts true crime researchers today. Let's move to Section 1, the library murder, Riverside, California, October 1966. The sequence of events here was rapid and just absolutely tragic. On the evening of October 30th, 1966, an 18-year-old college freshman named Cheri Jo Bates was working late at the Riverside City College campus library. When she left that night, she found her car parked exactly where she left it, but it was completely dead. It mysteriously wouldn't start. Then, just a few hours later, on Halloween morning, October 31st, her body was discovered in a nearby alley. Now, investigators quickly realized this wasn't just some random crime of opportunity. No, this was a highly premeditated ambush. First, the attacker deliberately sabotaged her vehicle earlier in the day by disconnecting the car's distributor coil. That's a very specific mechanical way to disable an engine, so she couldn't drive away. Then, the killer actually just waited in the dark for Cheri Jo to return, basically using her disabled car as a trap to ambush her in that adjacent alleyway. A totally crucial detail here is that Cheri Jo fought back, and I mean fiercely. Evidence at the scene showed she was brutally stabbed multiple times, but it also painted a picture of a very violent physical struggle right before her death. She definitely did not go down without a fight, and that struggle left vital physical evidence behind. Moving on to Section 2, the taunting letters, a killer reaches out. About a month after the murder, the case took this deeply disturbing psychological turn. Local police, and heartbreakingly, Cheri Jo's own family, received an anonymous typed poem. The text referenced the killing in disturbing detail, showing an intimate knowledge of the crime scene that honestly only the killer, or maybe someone incredibly close to the investigation, could possibly know. Then, there was a long silence. Until exactly 1 year later, in October 1967, when a total of 3 separate, chilling letters were dropped into the mail. The sheer audacity of this killer was staggering. These 3 letters were sent to the local police, a local newspaper, and in an act of unimaginable cruelty, to Cheri Jo's father. All 3 explicitly claimed responsibility for her murder. But beyond that, they actively taunted authorities for failing to catch him. It was just an open mockery of law enforcement. But this brings us to Section 3, the Zodiac connection, striking similarities. Years later, the entire landscape of this investigation completely shifted. Let's look at the timeline. We start with a Riverside murder in late 1966. Then we get those taunting letters exactly a year later in 1967. And then a gap. It isn't until 1969, 3 whole years after Cheri Jo's murder, that the Zodiac Killer officially begins his recognized reign of terror in Northern California, complete with his own series of bizarre, taunting letters. When you actually look at the evidence side by side, it's pretty easy to see why independent researchers and retired investigators noticed a huge connection. I mean, the 1967 Riverside letters taunted authorities, included specific, non-public crime details, and had this erratic, bragging tone. Fast forward to the 1969 Zodiac letters, and you see an incredibly similar taunting nature, the exact same arrogant tone, and a chillingly similar writing style. The psychological overlap is really hard to ignore. But hold on, the debate is heavily divided. On one hand, you have independent sleuths who are totally convinced the same person committed the Bates murder and the later Zodiac killings. But on the other side, official law enforcement agencies, including the Riverside Police Department, have flat out stated that there simply isn't sufficient hard evidence to conclusively link the 2 cases together. Let's look at Section 4, Suspects and Evidence, the search for answers. So, independent of the whole Zodiac theory, who was actually investigated for this? Well, over the decades, police rigorously pursued multiple avenues.
Early on, a classmate who had exhibited some really troubling behavior towards Cheri Jo became a significant person of interest. In more recent years, investigators even turned to modern DNA testing on the physical evidence left behind from that violent alleyway struggle. But despite these cutting-edge leads, as of today, no conclusive suspect has been identified.
The frustrating reality for investigators is that massive gap between circumstantial suspicion and actual courtroom proof. Despite the classmate's troubling behavior, he was never definitively connected to the crime through hard forensic evidence. In a court of law, you need physical proof, and investigators just haven't been able to cross that threshold to make an arrest.
Finally, Section 5, an enduring cold case, unresolved tragedy.
Because of everything we've covered in this explainer today, the Cheri Jo Bates murder is trapped in a kind of historical limbo. It just exists in this strange, unresolved space. Like, is it its own isolated, standalone cold case committed by a local who slipped through the cracks? Or is it a terrifying prequel, the earliest known crime committed by one of America's most infamous serial killers? It remains forever debated by amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike. Ultimately, though, all these theoretical debates kind of pale in comparison to the human cost. We are left with a really haunting question. Whether connected to the Zodiac or not, will the person responsible for Cheri Jo's death ever face justice? It's a sobering thought for sure, reminding us of a family and dedicated investigators who have been relentlessly searching for answers since 1966. Until a definitive piece of DNA or a final confession comes to light, the Riverside Library murder remains a tragic, open chapter in true crime history. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the tough questions.